everybody. Welcome from wherever you are joining us, near or far. You've joined a conversation about how movies have the power to move us, to change our beliefs, our behaviors, and ultimately to influence the policies and practices that shape our society. I'm Holly Gordon, and I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Participant. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Participant, we're a film production company based in Los Angeles, founded by entrepreneur Jeff Skoll. Jeff's original vision is that storytelling can inspire people to get into the arena and make social change. And that vision is what guides us every day in the films we make. Some of you may have heard of some of our films: An Inconvenient Truth, Spotlight, the documentary RBG, Roma, and the focus of today's conversation, which is Judas and the Black Messiah. And you guys are in for a treat, because joining me are three people whose work is integral to the big question that brought us together. How can we use stories to move us closer to a more sustainable world of peace and prosperity for all? Anika McLaren is the Executive Vice President of Narrative Film at Participant, and it's Anika's job, lucky thing, to help us select the movies that we make, ushering the films through production, working with artists and other producers, ushering the movies to the screen, including the film that we're going to focus on today, which is Judas. Also joining us is my incredible colleague on the impact side, Hoda Hawa. In her role as an impact producer, Hoda helps to connect our movies to frontline activists and policymakers to make sure our movies make a difference. And finally, Katie Borum-Chatu, the Executive Director of the Center for Media and Social Impact, which is a nonprofit organization housed at American University. And Katie is one of the leading experts in the field of storytelling for change, and is someone whose work we rely on at Participant to formulate better strategy and to get better results in the work we do. And this is just one of the ways in her new book. So please do read the bios of our incredible guests on the website to learn more about them, because they are amazing. And we want to keep our intros short and just jump right into conversation. So I hope that you all had a chance, if you haven't already seen Judas, that at least you were able to screen the trailer for the film. And I want to start with you, Anika. You have a job that's the envy of many. You work with filmmakers every day in the work that you do. Can you talk a little bit about the behind the scenes of making Judas, how it first came across your desk, what attracted it to you as a participant film, and what this film particularly means to you?
Sure. Well, I would say that Judas and the Black Messiah was one of those special projects that, when it came to us, which was via our producing partners, Macro and Ryan Coogler and his company Proximity, it was an incredibly loud project that really jumped out and said, please get involved with me. So I would say that, unlike some other films where, maybe it feels like you want to read the project or think about it, this was one where, when it was presented, and it was presented to us as a film that was getting made in short order, it had the elements attached. Shaka King as the filmmaker, Ryan Coogler as the producer, and it also had a distributor involved. And so,
are you guys, is Anika blocking up for you guys a bit? Okay, so why don't we move over to you, Hoda? Just take a beat while Anika's line comes back. So Judas was released in February, and it tells the story of Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panthers. And it was your job to make that movie, I like to say, make a difference. So can you talk to us a little bit about how the impact campaign around Judas came together, how you worked with Shaka King, the director, and some of the other major players around this film, and what the thrust of the impact campaign was really designed to do?
Absolutely. And I think, before Anika cut out, she was talking about how loud the project and the film is and just wanting to be involved. And I'm so grateful that, I am able to play a small role in this impact campaign alongside the film. Early on when we were thinking about how we would want to design the campaign, for the film and the partners that we would reach out to, we had some really incredible conversations with Shaka King, the director, and the other filmmakers involved in the project to really understand what the why was behind making the film. Why now? Why the subject? Why the content? And we also obviously reached out to Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., Chairman Fred's son, and his fiancee, Mother Akua, to obviously ensure that the story is being told about Chairman Fred, wanting them to be involved, to be part of that design, and really to make an impact for the communities that it means and matters the most to. And so through those conversations, we really understood that taking advantage of the excitement and the momentum around the release of the film and really wanting to educate audiences on that history of the Black Panther Party, not just the history that some of us have been taught. For most of us, I think that history has been erased altogether, but reteaching that accurate and nuanced history and really focusing on the positive legacy and contributions that Chairman Fred was able to contribute through being the Black Panther Party Illinois chapter lead. And so we really started to pull out these themes, his genius in building the Rainbow Coalition, bringing together a multi-ethnic and multiracial coalition of communities who were really being overlooked and underserved by their own governments. Feeding children through the free breakfast program, setting up community clinics because there was no access to healthcare, really pulling on those themes. I think we did, and I'm very proud of the conversations that we were able to start with activists today and say, this can be an example about how we can organize and mobilize and continue the movement and the struggle that was that Chairman Fred was a part of in the 60s.
And I'll give Anika a second just to get resettled. Anika, we're talking about how the themes of the film played into the action campaign around the positive legacy of the Black Panther Party, which Hoda pointed out. For many of us growing up in the United States, we either had a very one-dimensional view of the Black Panther Party and their contributions to our nation's history and the kind of programs that they ran, or no understanding. So as you were approached with what you called a very loud film, was some of that in your mind as you were greenlighting this movie, or what were you looking for as you were thinking about participants' engagement in this story particularly?
I mean, I was looking for an approach to the subject matter that felt revelatory. And I think, for those of you who have seen the film, the Bill O'Neill Hampton relationship and the, genre of the movie, and the fact that it was, had the texture of a sort of a crime movie, that you were getting your vegetables and being entertained at the same time, and that there was this feeling of authenticity as well to it. That, again, for those of you who are in the entertainment business, we read and consider a lot of films. A lot of, them are based on true stories. And, you don't want people to feel like they're going to the film and just seeing a Wikipedia article or post. And so, excuse me, that was, a big thing, was just that it wasn't, that it was, a Fred Hampton biopic. It was way more than that. There was a number of threads that really are part of what makes up the movie that you hopefully have seen.
So really the entertainment value of the story, along with the sort of idea that we're reckoning with history, as we watch it. And we're seeing an inside line on what was happening in the 1960s that many of us didn't have any idea about. So Hoda, as you were working with activists on activists of today, leaders of the movement for Black Lives today and other activists, were they drawing threads of the narrative from what they watched on the screen in the film that Anika had helped bring to life, and the work that they're doing today across the United States? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think one of the most special things in all of the conversations that we've had with partners from the beginning of the campaign to now is we heard over and over again activists and movement leaders saying, I see myself in Chairman Fred. I see myself in this film. The work continues. One of our impact partners put it so beautifully, and it's such a sad thing to think about, but that these issues that activists are dealing with today are part of an unbroken timeline of issues that communities are dealing with and facing. And not only that, it's not the under-resourced and underserved communities, but thinking about the relationship between activists and government, and the way that the government sort of viewed Chairman Fred and the way that they saw him as a threat because he was able to bring people together. He was able to bring communities together. Activists today said, this is exactly how we feel. Some leaders, movement leaders, have to hire their own security because they know that there are dossiers and files on them in certain security agencies. And so I think that the themes present in the film, the leadership of Chairman Fred was definitely exemplified, and leaders today were able to point to that and felt very grateful for seeing themselves on screen.
One of the things that's amazing about film as a social change tool, if you will, is that you can highlight in a sort of entertainment setting this idea of visible role models of what's possible. And that can be both inspiring for everyday activists, but also inspiring, as you just said, for the activists themselves who are really in the movement every day. So Katie, how does this relationship between entertainment and social justice really come to play in the work that you study? And how is that role of the connection between entertainment and policy change or behavior change changed over time?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. And I have to say, to respond to one of Hoda's stories, I'm about to tell you a story that maybe you don't know about the Panthers' impact. So I was a producer for the legendary Norman Lear for about a decade in Los Angeles. Those were my Hollywood years. Creator of All in the Family, The Jeffersons, Sanford and Son, et cetera, et cetera. Guy who sort of pioneered the idea that we can talk about social justice topics through comedy. And the Black Panthers had a major impact on why we have the Jeffersons, because this comes from a little piece of his book, but I expanded the story for a new book that I'm writing. The Black Panthers came to see him one day in his office after the show Good Times was on, and they said, we're here to see the garbage man. And Norman was the garbage man. We're here to take out the garbage. And the Panthers were frustrated, to put it mildly. They said the one show that we have of a Black family on television shows this kind of struggle all the time. There's nothing aspirational, and there are plenty of middle to upper class Black Americans who are doing quite well. Can't you show them? So Norman had already been thinking about the show The Jeffersons, because George Jefferson was a character in All of the Family. But after that meeting, they literally, this is why George Jefferson in the theme song is moving on up. They made him very aspirational, very successful businessman. So that also, when we think about the far-reaching impact of the Black Panthers, it was really culturally specific too, in addition to all of the things. So I have not seen the movie yet, but I'm thrilled. And I wrote about Stanley Nelson's documentary, Black Panthers, Vanguard of a Revolution, which came out in 2015 and was a really important corrective history on what American schools and institutions have taught us about the Black Panthers. So thrilled to see the movie. Anyway, that's a fun story for you all, but let me answer.
Story.
Yeah, that's an Aspen exclusive. I just decided in real time to let that out, so you don't have to wait for the book. Yeah, so as Holly mentioned at the top, I both make and study the role of popular culture and storytelling and film in particular, comedy, documentary, etc., in fostering social justice. And I'll just start with, at the risk of being a little bit obnoxious, but sometimes when you write these things, you like what you said and you want to hold on to them so you don't misquote yourself. But to answer your question, Holly, what I wrote in my book, Story Movements, How Documentaries Empower People and Inspire Social Change, is culture, the narratives and values transmitted through art and creativity and media, is a force for enforcing and reinforcing the status quo and for disrupting it. And that, I think, is the summative idea when you ask the question, how does this matter? Well, we can disrupt the status quo as well, right? So we know that particularly when we're talking about the Black Panthers and any number of communities that have been mistreated and dehumanized in media portrayals, it's often the case that we can disrupt that later on. So there are a couple of things that I like to talk about when I talk about entertainment and social change is, it's always important for us to keep in mind that technology has always intervened in these transformative revolutionary media moments and empowered storytellers and new storytellers in totally different ways. So in a way, just to geek out a little bit, if you look at the moment of early television and the evolution of film, television was brand new. It had to be programmed. People were looking for content to program it. This is all a new idea. And at the same time, film gear got very small around the same time. And so what that meant was that an entirely new group of people were able to film very intimate stories. And perhaps more importantly for this conversation, when we're talking also about representation and equity, we had communities of people who were able to tell their own stories. This is the birth of the verite filmmaking style and documentary, which gives us our most intimate stories that often can have the greatest social change because we are allowed to be invited into communities and lived realities that are often ignored. So I look at this moment in the same transformative way. So we asked the question, Holly, about how that has changed over time. There's a lot to say that's dystopian about social media and what we call the participatory media age, but there's a lot for those of us who do social change work, and I know that's all of us on this group, there's a lot to say about how empowering that has been for voices to come through. And when we talk about the entertainment industry, for voices to speak up and demand that they see different portrayals, see different stories, see stories corrected. And the entertainment industry can't really afford to ignore that because it's very public dissent. So for those of us who think a lot about how democracy unwinds and how public policy is shaped by public opinion, all of this matters. And culture, creative culture and storytelling, if you ask me, is the most powerful force that we have, because it is something, even when we are divided ideologically, we usually have some cultural touchstones that we can come together on. So I'll just stop there. And Holly, if you ask me another question, and it's okay if you don't, but if you do, about how social change works through entertainment, I'm happy to sort of give the kind of 5 major elements. But it's okay if you don't get to it.
No, I'm just coming. I'll definitely come back to it. I want to grab Anika, though, again, and ask her, building off what you just said about how the expansion of the number of people who can access platforms and demand stories that don't come from the same kind of people. How is that having an impact, Anika, on the kinds of things you're both seeing coming through your creative pipeline and the kind of diversity of choices that you are now making in your role as almost a cultural winnower, if you will?
Yeah, I think that what's happening is, for many years, the people who got to be filmmakers and to imagine filmmaking as a career or producing as a career was fairly limited. Equipment was expensive. The schooling, was going to film school was this sort of thing that just wasn't as accessible. And I mean, it's still not super accessible to a lot of people, but because the technology, the digitization of the camera and all of that stuff, there's just more people making things in a variety of ways. And so I think for us, the usual channels by which we actually, and most people in the entertainment industry, producers and distributors, we often get things via sort of sanctioned channels, agents, managers. But because of social media now, sometimes people are discovered, having posted an Instagram story, or, there's digital film festivals, or the short of the week, which is a popular, way of discovering short filmmakers. And so I think, quite honestly, the demand for different kinds of stories and people being somewhat exhausted by hearing the same, social mores and stuff just reinforced in movies and TV over and over again is the lack of desire for that is pretty loud, especially from younger people. So I would say it has changed our decision making process just by the fact that there's more variety of content and of people to consider. I will say, for the record, I've been in the business for almost 20 years. So a little bit for me is like, I know it's changing and it's different than it was, but, being in it sometimes leaves the perspective is different.
Yeah, well, certainly I feel as though a friend of mine recently said, like, there's so much great stuff to watch. And it feels as though I am feeling more and more excited about how much I can learn just from one of my favorite things, watching TV. And then I'm also excited about how these big moments that can be created around a piece of content like Judas and the Black Messiah can connect into the work that I wake up every day to do, which is try to change policy and try to shift people's understanding of what's right and what's just and what's true. And Hoda, I wanted to have you talk a little bit to this audience about how we've connected the sort of excitement and the sort of Hollywood sparkle of a film like Judas with some of the lawmakers who create the policies and structures by which we live our lives. I know you've been working really closely with congressional leaders, and I thought this would be a great audience to share some of that work with.
Absolutely. I feel like, I'm just so grateful to be on this project because I feel like Judas and the Black Messiah is the gift that keeps on giving. We're able to educate audiences. We're able to connect the legacy of Chairman Fred to activists and leaders today. And we're able to start conversations and build momentum and energy with folks typically maybe not as connected or don't really see the entertainment industry as being a tool that could help with advocacy and legislation. But in my opinion, it definitely can. And so early on, like you mentioned, Holly, we launched our campaign in early February around the release of the film. And we reached out to members of Congress, specifically from the Tri-Caucus, so members from the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and the Congressional Asian Pacific Islander Caucus, really to build that rainbow coalition in Congress, reflecting the spirit and the idea of that rainbow coalition that Chairman Fred built on the ground in Illinois, to celebrate not only the legacy of Chairman Fred, to talk about the positive contributions and actually have lawmakers acknowledge and celebrate those contributions, but also, again, to connect it to this idea of an unbroken timeline of the relationship between citizen, activist, and government. And so, I was very pleased to hear the conversation from members who were very excited to have this film available, to be using it as a tool for their constituents, to talk to their constituents and really to be able to craft legislation to not repeat the past. And so, for example, just a couple of months after the release and launch of our campaign, Congressman Bobby Rush, who was a former Panther himself in Illinois, announced a new piece of legislation that would require the FBI to open up more files around COINTELPRO, the government program that was targeting Black activists, among other activists of color, to really see the depths of how nefarious really that program was. Obviously, Chairman Fred was targeted and assassinated by his own government on American soil. And so we're continuing those conversations with legislators to use this film, to use the campaign as a way to mobilize, to get constituents excited around what Anika was talking about earlier, right? They're getting their broccoli, they're getting their vegetables in an entertaining way, but also to think about how we can activate those audiences to be part of a larger campaign, to get them involved in pushing for, supporting, or opposing legislation that, again, does not create or that doesn't rehash history, but that forges a new path forward.
Yeah, and I did want to underscore this idea that that the films that we help to bring into the world at Participant are but accelerants for work that is being led every day by our partners, by legislators like Bobby Rush, who's thinking about these things every day, and by the sort of activists that lead the movement, and that our hope is always to connect content with the folks who are working day in and day out to make the change. And that leads me to you, Katie, which is one of the things we're always hoping for, is that film can start conversations that may not be visible to some or accelerate conversations. But what are those 5 things that you keep in mind if you're going into the space of driving impact with storytelling?
Sorry to lead you there, Holly, but it does fit well with your campaign. So I'm not entirely, I was really happy to hear about all of that, actually. Let's see. I wanted to start with something. Oh, yes. So I have a study that I led that's also a chapter in the book about how films influence public policy. So there's lots in the social change spectrum, right? When we think about how, from mobilizing a base to getting people who don't know to know something. And the piece that really stood out for that work, I interviewed, and these are films that really changed laws. It's a film called Sin by Silence, a documentary that changed California law around domestic violence survivors. Sin by Silence, a film called Semper Fi about environmental justice. It was nominated for an Academy Award, and a film called Playground around humans, the trafficking of young girls. And, you know, what was interesting, I know that we talk a lot, we're in such a polarized moment in this country, and we actually have been there for quite a long time. It's not entirely new, even though it feels, you know, very explicit at the moment. But what we learned when we interviewed, and I had a co-author who worked with me on this piece, when we interviewed the policymakers and their staffers, what they would say over and over again was, if this film had felt like a piece of propaganda from one side or another, it actually wouldn't have done anything. But when a film feels like it is teaching us something new, it is narratively engaging, and it sparks, the emotional response is something that we cannot look away from. That's real social change. So I think sometimes we hear something like that, and we think, well, that's nice, a film did that thing, but journalism does this other thing. No, we should not dismiss the place and the role that the actual art plays, that the role of a beautifully edited scene and an evocative score, and the way that in the case of a fictional, not a fictional film, but a film that is based on a real story, there is dramatic moments. Those all matter. That is what is special about storytelling that makes it not the same thing as a fact sheet or even a beautiful piece of print journalism, although of course we need that too. So to answer your question more directly, I just wanted to get on a soapbox for 1 second and say that.
I'm glad you said that, Katie. It's really, really important.
Yeah, sometimes we dismiss it, you know what I mean? And I mean, we in the sort of general, those of us in if we say that we're in a sector of people who intentionally work with civil society and really believe in explicitly creating a more pluralistic, just world, we can't say things about art that are like, well, that's nice, but it's not. No, that is the social change. The art matters because humans don't make decisions based on entirely rational deliberation of facts of information. We have known this for a really, really long time, but I think it's hard for smart people to kind of admit out loud that we're not entirely rational beings that get a series of facts and we act on them. And if that were the case, we would have solved climate change a long time ago, right? Because we've known that information for a very long time. We haven't been moved in certain ways. So that leads me to answer your question, and I'll be very brief with that, Holly, because I just took up all of my time. But when we think about how stories work differently in social change, work differently from other ways that we acquire information, there is a beautiful theory that I know Holly knows because it's a lot in my work and shows up prominently in my books, but narrative transportation is this really beautiful theory that we use a lot in the study of this work that tells us that when we're deeply transported into an entertaining story, it actually bypasses our usual barriers to persuasion. So this is something that we kind of know intuitively, but we're deeply transported because of the role of emotion and the role of connecting with characters on screen and because of the art and the entertainment value. So again, if it's not entertaining, it's not doing anything. The role of emotion, amplified community from online and offline activism. This is, of course, what Hoda was talking about quite a bit in Hoda's work, but this really matters a great deal because none of these stories sort of exist in a cultural vacuum. And so culture is created and recreated by all of us. It's created by all of us working together. So film drops into the news media narrative, is amplified by activists, amplified by the public, and all of that creates a cultural narrative. And strategic layer distribution matters quite a bit. So when we think about contemporary film, that matters for social change. We're not just talking about the entertainment marketplace. We're talking also about how films interact with real physical living, breathing communities in places that include congressional briefing rooms, Senate hearing rooms. All of that kind of physical interaction really matters. And then a final thing that I would mention is calls to action embedded in the storytelling sometimes are really, really important. So there's a long-standing body of work called entertainment education, which is like not a very exciting phrase, but a really beautiful body of work that basically helps us to understand how all of this psychology and sociology comes together. And the last thing that I wanted to slip in here, when I've written about documentaries in particular, but this certainly applies to the other forms of media that we're talking about here. It applies to work that I do in comedy, scripted film, particularly when it's about real events. We also need to always consider the strengthening of civil society that happens when films come out and they tell a story that either has not been told or invites us to imagine a new narrative. We call that civic imagination, or is a form of social critique. That always strengthens the civil society organizations that are toiling away every day at making that change happen. When we give them a tool like a story, they can get people to physically come together in ways that maybe a public hearing about water contamination is not going to do. So this deep connection with civil society and humanitarian organizations that need the stories is something that I think those of us who do this work should always center. And I know Participant has a very long track record in deeply respecting those organizations, but we can never forget about that strengthening role.
I want to keep you in my pocket, Katie, and bring you out whenever we need to be talking.
I'm available to travel, Holly. I'm ready to get out.
Because this is really at the heart of the work we're trying to do. And for those of the folks in the audience who really are trying, or who have a more scientific or policy approaches to making change, my sort of exhortation is really think about how story can help you do that. Every great movement is based on storytelling, and usually it comes from the behind the podium, but we put our stories on screens really to try to reinforce that work of civil society and help people imagine a different tomorrow. And with that in mind, we do have a poll for you guys, which is there a movie that has, I'm going to steal from Katie's word, been narratively transportational, a movie that's really changed you. So pop it into the poll that's being launched, and we'll see if there's a quorum as we wrap. With that in mind, though, I wanted to go to some questions that have come in to us. So one of them, Hoda, that I'm going to throw to you, which is when you shape a campaign, and we know that this is something we wrestle with the participants, so it's a kind of setup. How do you keep it, when you shape it around a film which has a shelf life, it has a life as it goes into the world, how do you keep it alive beyond the first wave of interest? And try to weave the current actions that you're so engaged in making happen into a tapestry of the future? I love the way this question was asked.
Yeah, it's such a fantastic question. And like you said, Holly, it's something that I think we think about all the time. I can talk about, the context of Judas and the Black Messiah. And like I said at the top of this panel, what we were really aiming to do is educate audiences on that authentic and nuanced history of the Black Panther Party, the members, the work that they did, their contributions to society. Now that the film is, like, I guess out in Hollywood speak, out of the theatrical window and now back onto, it'll be going back to its streaming platform in a few days. The way that we are thinking about keeping up the momentum, ensuring that we hit those themes, that we're still working with our impact partners, which, to your point, Katie, I think we can have the best, most beautifully designed campaign, but if we don't have those partners on board who are who see the value of the campaign, of the film, then I don't think we would be as successful as we are with our impact campaigns. And so I do give all the credit to our impact partners who are just incredible in working with us and keeping us authentic and keeping the campaign itself authentic. So now that we're sort of out of the big marketing splash of the film coming out, what we're really aiming to do is be more specific and targeted with our work. And so with this impact campaign, we've actually developed a really incredible educational guide to go alongside the campaign and the film. And I invite you all to go to www.liveforthepeople.com to check out all of the work that we're doing with the campaign and really to check out the educational guide and see how that can be useful in your work, or just to brush up on history and to be better informed on the work of the Black Panther Party. But getting that guide into traditional classrooms and not so traditional classrooms, again, reflecting the work of the Black Panther Party and setting up community-based education, this idea of liberation theology based on education and knowing your history. We're continuing to work with not only our impact partners from the beginning of the campaign, but now with educators at universities and high schools and in communities to get this information, this knowledge, this history into communities. Again, the idea is for this behavioral change, behavioral shift, but also to stand on the giants who have done the work in the past and see how we can create more change moving forward.
And really, it turns into generational change, because the history that you learn is the history you understand of your country, and you can only build from a fuller, richer understanding. Anika, so what I wanted to send, I know we had like a tour of your house as you struggled.
So sorry, this is my awful internet. I apologize.
No, don't worry.
It's only going to go up from here, Anika. The whole week is going to be great.
So your audio is a little faint, but I'm still going to throw you this question because I think I think the folks who were gathered love hearing how movies are made. So in our work, we're always choosing movies that have a social message. So as you're looking at content, looking for films to greenlight, how do you balance what is often sort of really complex issues that are in our movie, and this sort of the idea of despair, balancing despair with ensuring that it leaves an audience with a sense of agency or hope. How do you sort of think about that as you're assessing movies for us to get behind, the sort of mix of emotions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Is the audio okay?
Yeah, good. Sister. Yeah.
So you actually touched on it in the question, which is that a lot of what we look for is how you leave the audience. So it's sort of, really about the takeaway. And, it's true. It's, if you are thinking about, the existential issues facing the world, you could generate a lot of depressing stories. But I also think that, it's this balance of hope and context, understanding, what's behind the issue, and really how people are helping move the needle in whatever the story is. So I think for us, the balance that I think is a challenge when you're working in this space is how to find human stories that are addressing issues that feel potentially broad or not about people, or just that the people are the victims of the issue. And so, I think it's thinking kind of like with Judas, where there's a genre element too. So it's, or even a movie like Wonder, where, it was a family film and you had representation, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. All of these things sort of help us find that really specific participant textured movie where we can deal with an issue, but when you leave, you don't just think, oh yeah, well that happened and isn't that unfortunate. You think, well, oh, maybe I should, if we're so lucky, maybe I am thinking about things a little bit differently, or maybe I'm just have a question in my mind, or maybe I want to see something else about that same thing, like in the case of On the Basis of Sex, the narrative feature, and RBG, the documentary. So I really do think it's sort of about finding, an interesting genre so that it, is not maybe what's expected. And then also really making sure that you stick the landing with what people are really substantively taking away from the movie, and that it seems like a human being can do something about it, and it isn't just, this is the way it is.
Yeah, we think about that a lot on the impact side. So at Participant, we're not involved in, I sit on the Green Light Committee, as Anika knows, but we really try to let the art lead the way. To Katie's point, that the authenticity of the art is so important. But it is really important when you're thinking about campaign work or using a film to drive social change, this idea that Anika, you're bringing forward, which is how does the audience feel at the end? And there are certain animating feelings, and then there are feelings that just make you think like, oh gosh, this is overwhelming. I'm just gonna tune out. And so, Katie, I'm wondering, from your study of many, many different campaigns, are there certain elements that you look for that you've seen to be effective? Is it about specificity? Is it about timeliness? Is it about how it makes you feel? Like what are the dynamics that you see again and again in films that really move the needle?
Yeah, there are a couple of different things. And first, I want to lift up something Anika said because I love it, and I want to add a little frame that I like to use when you're thinking about the emotional affect that you leave an audience with. And I love knowing that Participant is very intentional about that because, when we talk about social justice work, it is by its nature difficult. And, this is an understatement, right? Fighting for justice and equity, because of systems of oppression is by nature just impossibly hard work. And it's easy to stay in a dystopian view consistently because it's so difficult. And when we talk about, when I write about storytelling and social change, I often write about two different things. One is the role of social critique. We've always needed that to say, this is wrong, this is not correct, needs to be fixed, this is unjust. But we also must do the civic imagination, which is to imagine the world, what it looks and feels and sounds like and can be when it is more just, right? So there's so many movies that have done that for us. And I think, again, that's another aspect of this that we should never just sort of let go by. Well, it was just a happy movie. Well, yes, that plays a really important role in energizing people to keep up the fight and keep up the struggle. So the one thing that I'll say to fully answer that question, Holly, is that audiences are really smart, as we know. And inauthenticity in the campaign or in the story is very obvious. So I teach a class at American University called Documentary Storytelling and Social Change. And we were watching, I actually forgot what the film was, so I don't even have to keep it anonymous because I don't remember what it was. But it was a film, it was a climate justice film, but it's beautiful storytelling. But then in the end, it sort of goes to like, so here are 4 things that you can do. It's very, very reductive. And my students who, until that point, were completely in like, oh, this is an outrage. We took a break. We talked about it. And then when we got to this reductive part, they were like, yeah, that felt like someone sat in a conference room and said like, so the story of an authentic, I know this sounds so obvious, but an authentic story told by the storyteller who is equipped to tell that story. And I mean that in every kind of way. Always is what moves the needle for us culturally, because audiences know and can feel when something is authentic, and the storyteller is the one that should be telling the story. And I feel like the last thing that I want to say here that's really important, when we think about how we as a sort of sector of media makers, producers, distributors, social justice, people like me who kind of work in lots of different spaces, I think it's really important that we center always the artists and supporting them, and the role that we can play in properly financially resourcing storytellers that can actually make it into the social capital network of Hollywood, because that we will not have these stories if we're not centering the artists. And sometimes I feel like they're actually not centered in conversations. So I just wanted to add that as my evangelism for these incredible creators who have stories that we need to know.
So as we round out, giving some snaps to Katie and centering the artist, you never go wrong if you center the art. I wanted to just read out a couple of the films that have come up in the poll. The Mission, Casablanca, Wizard of Oz, it's an interesting one. Just Mercy, Midnight Cowboy, Crip Camp, the new documentary from the Obama production team. And go around. So there's nothing better than watching a film like Midnight Cowboy or Cry Freedom for the pure entertainment joy of it. And now, thanks to the audience, we have an invitation to watch it for the narrative transportation element too. And I wanted to go around to the 3 of you as we say goodbye to our friends today. Is there a film that you'd invite this audience to watch that had an impact on you, and a quick why if that's relevant? Hoda, you want to start?
Happy to, yes. I think one of the first films that I came away understanding the intersection of entertainment and policy implications was, and this is an old film, but The Battle of Algiers. To me, just still is so impactful in what film can do to justify war or to justify freedom fighters. And I think it depends, and it's so subjective, and I think it's such an incredibly and beautifully well-made film. But just tying it to the moment when I saw it as a young student, and as this country was going through policy conversations on whether or not to enter into a war, that to me was a very impactful film. And so I invite you all, if you haven't seen it already, to check that out.
That's great. I haven't seen it, so I will, and then we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Anika, you want to go next?
Sure. I actually have a documentary that was, which was the 13th, which is semi recent, which for me was really illuminating, because I think I realized how often I take for granted that I understand the full context of an issue or of social justice. And for me, I thought, oh, I'm African American, I know African American history in this way that it's kind of arrogant. And when I saw the movie, I just thought, oh, I didn't get it to this degree. And so that was a movie that really did change and made me challenge my own understanding and wanting to always have more of an open mind when I'm talking to people and trying to understand the perspective, even when it seems like, I'm part of the group that a piece of art is about. So it was really meaningful to me.
That's really interesting. And I agree on that film. And agree on the very surreal impact that having your context shift in such a profound way, where you start to question everything you thought you knew. Katie?
Yeah, I agree with that one too. And the fact that it's just the lasting legacy of that film, the way that it's taught in schools and will be for years, total restructuring. And what's interesting about that film is that the original argument about the 13th Amendment is a legal argument that existed in a book for quite some time. But again, this is why the film is important, because the film came along, and if people were not going to read Michelle Alexander's legal scholar book, they could access this argument that Ava put together. It's a beautiful relationship about taking something that's a fairly structural, potentially complex way of looking at things, and she put it in a movie so that we could all get it. So yeah, I love that one too. Since I write so much about movies and make them and comedy, I think I have to pick what I'm thinking about right now instead of a favorite of all time. But there's a documentary out right now called Time that is really astonishing. And the artistry of it is also important. A different way to contemplate the effect of mass incarceration on a family and community. And there's a film that came out a couple of years ago called Quest. That's another really beautiful artistic film about a neighborhood in Philadelphia. And it's just a gorgeous piece of cinematic art. So I know for the three of you that also look at footage all the time, it's just beautiful, this film. Yeah, those are just a few. And I will say the last one, I'm friends with Jim Lebrecht, who made Crip Camp. And I cannot get over the footage that they had to make that film. It's just an astonishing feat that the film is Crip Camp. Did I say that?
Yes, you did.
Yeah, nominated for the Academy Award. It's just an amazing story, and they have done a beautiful impact campaign. And he's just a lovely human. So really recommend that one. Those are things I'm thinking about right now.
So it's only Tuesday, but everyone has a long weekend of film watching ahead of them. So with that, I think we will wrap. And thanks so much to all of you. Anika, Hoda, Katie, thanks so much for being part of this conversation. And thanks so much for Aspen for bringing us together. There's nothing I love talking about more than the power of film to help us find a better future for all of us. So with that, over and out from our respective Zoom.
Thank you, Holly.
Thank you.